In the quiet afternoon inside a rehearsal room in the Mapo district of Seoul, Suga was seen sitting alone in a corner with an open laptop in front of him and an untouched bottle of mineral water by his side, while staff members moved around without disturbing his calm presence. The atmosphere that day didn't demand much activity, as the main rehearsal was scheduled for later in the evening, but Suga's early arrival indicated his dedication to maintaining a steady rhythm of work even when there was no obligation to do so. He wore a simple gray hoodie and black training pants, with no makeup, and only the soft sound of instrumental music could be faintly heard from a small speaker in the corner of the room. Several staff members noted that in recent days, Suga had appeared more introspective, often spending time in silence, not in a gloomy way, but more like someone who was quietly organizing his thoughts. A few minutes later, his personal manager arrived with a small video setup to record a short message that Suga wanted to share with fans through the group's official platform. There was no large crew, no elaborate setup, just one camera and a small microphone clipped to his shirt, enough to capture an intimate atmosphere. When the camera started recording, Suga spoke with a slow but steady pace, lowering his gaze briefly before looking into the lens and beginning to deliver a message that he had seemingly been contemplating for several days. The recording lasted only about 2 minutes, but in that short time, he shared a deep reflection on how the pressures of creating can feel overwhelming, especially in an entertainment industry that moves quickly and constantly demands something new. He didn't discuss sensational topics or touch on major issues, but instead focused on the small feelings experienced by anyone trying to continue creating in the face of uncertainty and criticism from many directions. After the session ended, the staff downloaded the video and immediately sent it to the content management team, who planned to publish it a few hours later, with minimal editing as per Suga's request to keep it as it was. Not long after the video was posted, the group's official platform was flooded with responses from ARMY, who said they were touched by Suga's message, which was simple yet resonated deeply. Many fans wrote that they felt seen and empowered to keep going, just by hearing someone they admired acknowledge that mental struggles are real. Some even mentioned that the video arrived at just the right moment, when they themselves were feeling lost or underappreciated. On social media, hashtags related to Suga's message began trending organically, not driven by any major campaign but purely from fans who wanted to share the moment with others. Several entertainment news editors in Korea and abroad began covering the video, not because Suga had made a controversial statement, but because in the simplicity of that video, he had shown an incredibly strong human side. What made it more compelling was that this moment didn't arise in the context of an album promotion, a comeback, or any major project. It was simply a part of his daily routine that wasn't intended to become big news. After recording the video, Suga returned to his rehearsal activities as usual, turning his laptop music back on and adjusting his movement tempo to match the rhythm, as if unaware that within a short time, his words would become a warm topic of discussion across fan communities worldwide. The day passed without celebration, without surprises, just a silence filled with sincerity, and for many, that was more than enough to become an inspiring moment. The following morning, still in Seoul, Suga resumed his regular schedule without making any reference to the viral impact of his video the previous day, showing up at a modest recording studio tucked between residential buildings where several producers were already waiting. The studio was neither grand nor meant for high-profile sessions, but it was a space Suga often used when he wanted to focus without distractions, a place that allowed him to work with a clear mind away from industry noise. Carrying a small backpack and greeting the receptionist with a nod, he headed straight into the booth, accompanied only by his longtime sound engineer. The team began the day by reviewing some demo tracks that had been parked for months, quietly going over segments, adjusting tones, and layering subtle harmonies without rushing. As the session progressed, staff noted that Suga maintained a calm yet steady pace, occasionally jotting notes into a plain black notebook he kept on his lap, pausing only to sip coffee or stretch his back. While there was no particular deadline to meet, his focus never wavered, and although he didn't speak about the video, everyone around him sensed a quiet shift in energy, as though something inside him had aligned more clearly after sharing that message with fans. Around midday, a small lunch delivery arrived, consisting of simple dishes like kimchi stew and rice, which he shared with the staff without any formalities. There were no formal meetings or business conversations, just light exchanges about instruments, sound textures, and the weather outside. After lunch, Suga spent a few moments alone on the rooftop of the studio, sitting on a bench with his legs crossed and his hoodie pulled over his head, watching the traffic move slowly below. Though no one approached him, some nearby studio workers later remarked how peaceful he looked, sitting quietly in thought, without his phone, only the breeze for company. In the late afternoon, as the session wrapped up, Suga packed up his belongings and left the studio without fuss, avoiding crowded exits by slipping through a back alley, his steps unhurried and grounded. By evening, social media was still pulsing with reactions to his message from the day before, with fans from various countries posting their own reflections about struggles in creativity, self-doubt, and the importance of continuing to try even when recognition felt distant. Without intending to create a movement, Suga had sparked a wave of personal sharing among fans, many of whom had never spoken about their emotional challenges in public before. Community pages began translating his video into multiple languages, and several fan-run blogs published long-form pieces analyzing why his message resonated so deeply, not only with artists but with anyone who ever felt unseen in their efforts. Meanwhile, Suga spent his evening quietly at home, according to someone familiar with his routine, watching an old music documentary and writing a few lines into a lyric file on his tablet. There were no interviews scheduled, no follow-up content planned, no marketing effort to expand the moment. It was simply a day lived normally, shaped only by the natural flow of his habits and his choice to keep moving. While entertainment outlets speculated whether his words might hint at a new musical direction or personal project, those close to him knew better than to interpret it as a publicity maneuver. It was just Suga being himself, reflective, honest, and grounded in his own quiet rhythm. What remained remarkable was how something as seemingly small as a 2-minute video, filmed without makeup or filters, had opened up such an honest response across a vast and diverse fanbase. For ARMY, it wasn't just about the message, but the sincerity behind it, and how it made them feel seen not just as supporters of a global artist, but as individuals navigating their own personal challenges. As the night deepened, the city lights of Seoul flickered on across the skyline, and for many, it was simply another Wednesday. But for those touched by Suga's quiet sincerity, the day had left an imprint. A quiet reminder that some of the most meaningful things come not through spectacle, but through stillness. The next day unfolded with the same quiet rhythm, as Suga maintained his usual routine without deviation, arriving at HYB's main headquarters mid-morning for a scheduled internal creative meeting related to upcoming songwriting workshops involving several younger artists under the label. Dressed casually in a muted blue sweatshirt and dark pants, he entered the building through the side entrance, greeted a few staff in the lobby with brief nods, and took the elevator directly to the 4th floor where a compact meeting room had already been prepared with notebooks, tablets, and a whiteboard filled with scribbles from an earlier session. The meeting was not a formal affair with tight agendas or presentation decks, but more of a relaxed discussion forum where a handful of producers and junior artists gathered to exchange ideas, ask questions, and seek guidance. Suga, known within the label for being approachable and clear-headed, participated not as a guest speaker or mentor figure, but simply as a fellow artist among others, sharing insights when needed and listening quietly when others spoke. During the session, a young producer expressed frustration about hitting creative blocks and struggling with motivation in a fast-paced environment that often left little room for rest or reflection. In response, Suga spoke briefly, not offering grand advice but merely sharing that he too had often worked through long periods of uncertainty, reminding everyone that no creative process was ever linear and that consistency mattered more than brilliance. His words, though few, were received with visible relief by several attendees, especially because they came from someone who had been through both massive global success and long stretches of personal pressure. After the meeting concluded, Suga stayed behind with one of the youngest participants to review a draft beat, providing soft suggestions on structure and mood without altering the creator's original vision, a gesture that left a strong impression on those who observed it. As lunchtime approached, he declined the offer to join the group meal at the company cafeteria and instead stepped outside for a short walk, choosing a small path that ran behind the HYBE building and led to a quiet coffee shop he sometimes visited when seeking space to think. There, he ordered a simple iced Americano, sat by the window with his headphones on, and began scribbling ideas into a small pocket notebook he always carried. The barista recognized him but didn't approach, and the atmosphere remained undisturbed. Back at headquarters in the late afternoon, the video team had compiled analytics on the performance of SUGA's message video, noting that its organic engagement was unusually high even without any promotional support. Though the marketing division briefly floated the idea of turning it into a content series, the proposal was quietly shelved after a short conversation with SUGA's management, who conveyed that the artist preferred to let the moment stand on its own without turning it into a campaign. Meanwhile, international media outlets continued to pick up the story, not sensationalizing it but framing it as an example of how authenticity in the entertainment world still holds weight. In fan communities, the ripple effect continued, with more people posting their own thoughts, artwork, and letters in response to SUGA's message, often citing how his calm and non-performative approach gave them a sense of grounding. Despite the expanding coverage, SUGA himself did not comment further or post follow-ups, remaining entirely absent from social media that day and focused on studio work for a collaborative track with a lesser-known indie artist scheduled for release later in the year. The recording session, held in a minimalistic studio on the city's northern edge, was straightforward and technical, involving sound checks, verse alignment, and vocal layering, all completed without fanfare. After the session ended, SUGA left quietly, waving briefly to the sound engineer and stepping into a waiting car that took him home. That night, he was seen briefly by neighbors walking his dog around his apartment complex, wearing a mask and cap, moving unhurriedly through the evening air. There were no photos, no statements, no new posts, just another quiet day in a life that many would assume to be filled with constant spotlight, but which, for SUGA, seemed to revolve around small, intentional movements. While the outside world buzzed with interpretations and reactions, he remained centered in his routine, grounded not by attention but by purpose, continuing to create, reflect, and move forward in his own measured way. The following day began under overcast skies in Seoul, casting a muted tone across the city as SUGA once again followed his consistent rhythm, this time starting his morning at a modest community center in the Seongsu area, where a private event was being held in collaboration with a youth arts foundation he had quietly supported for several years. The event itself was not publicized and involved no press, focused entirely on offering a safe space for aspiring musicians to present their compositions and receive informal feedback from professional creators. Dressed in a simple beige jacket and loose jeans, SUGA arrived without entourage, carrying a slim backpack and wearing a calm expression that had become characteristic of his recent appearances. Inside, a modest room equipped with folding chairs, a few keyboards, and portable speakers was filled with a small group of participants, many of whom appeared nervous at first but gradually eased into the setting once the session began. SUGA did not position himself as a judge or authority figure but rather blended in among the others, listening attentively as each person took their turn to present, occasionally nodding and offering thoughtful, measured comments when asked. His demeanor throughout the event remained gentle and grounded, never dismissive or overtly formal, and his emphasis on perseverance rather than perfection echoed the sentiment he had shared in his now widely circulated video. During one portion of the session, he spoke briefly about how creative fatigue often arrives quietly and without warning, and how the expectation to constantly produce something impactful can weigh heavily on one's mental stability, especially when the world assumes that success equates to immunity from doubt. His tone remained calm, devoid of dramatization, and his words felt more like observations than declarations, as though he were simply reflecting aloud among peers rather than delivering a message. After the event ended, SUGA stayed back to speak with a few participants who had more questions, choosing not to rush despite having a studio session scheduled later in the afternoon. When he eventually departed, it was without any photographs or fanfare, walking down a quiet side street and entering a car that had been discreetly waiting nearby. By that time, global fan communities were still actively circulating excerpts from his original message, with translated subtitles continuing to appear on fan-run YouTube channels and international ARMY accounts creating digital artwork inspired by the tone and atmosphere of the video. Several well-known content creators and wellness advocates had also begun referencing SUGA's message as a point of reflection in their own posts, discussing the emotional strain of creative work in high-pressure environments and drawing parallels between his perspective and their own experiences. Despite all of this, Suga remained offline, not issuing follow-ups or expanding the narrative in any way, and those close to him noted that he had no intention of building a larger conversation around the moment. Later that evening, he arrived at a quiet studio space he often used when working alone, bringing with him a single hard drive and a collection of analog recordings he had been revisiting in recent weeks. There, he worked well into the night, not recording vocals but focusing instead on instrumentation, adjusting chords, layering samples, and reprogramming sections that had never quite sounded right to him. He took several short breaks to step outside, sometimes pacing the narrow alley beside the building or standing silently at the open window, letting the summer air cool his skin. The hours passed slowly and deliberately, marked not by productivity metrics but by moments of clarity that appeared only when he gave them time to emerge naturally. No external interruptions came that night, and no urgent messages needed reply. It was a working evening like many others, except that this time, it carried the quiet momentum of a man who had recently laid something bare and chose not to look back at the response. For Suga, the day was neither extraordinary nor routine. It was simply another thread in a life woven by intention, steadiness, and the enduring belief that creating honestly, without spectacle, still matters.